brief states produce a fully interactive player experience inspired by an existing game. With my game being inspired by Mafia 1 Definitive Edition, some of the narrative elements were also inspired, whether it be within the inspired mission itself, with the main protagonist having to enter a church, interrupt the funeral and finish the job, or other areas of the game, such as the murder of rival crime bosses. Connecting these ideas into one creates more suspense that wasn't as present in the original mission, making the player feel as if there is truly a lot at stake in each one of their decisions. Starting off with the player character blueprint, the narrative menu is triggered as soon as the game is started, giving players a chance to know why they're doing what they're about to do. This can be skipped pressing the enter key. The new health system, which connects to the new ammo bar you saw in the gameplay section, was scrapped and replaced as an ammo system. This was done to save on time in the early days of the game, with a one-shot health system being used instead, on both player and enemies, but was planned to be improved upon later. With this new ammo system meant a reload system, which was done via ammo pickups around the map. This meant the player actually has to work for the ammo rather than just a normal reload mechanic. A test was done to see how much ammo was required per max ammo to make it more challenging, and the general consensus was around 5 or 6 due to the low amount of enemies at the time. This would also influence the gameplay later on, as each section has a maximum of 6 enemies. The movement mechanics, jump, crouch and walk, had already been created via the third person template, meaning the player movement was already completed. However, a few changes needed to be made in order to fit the top-down perspective, such as changing the mouse control to only move left and right, and playing about with the crouch and jump until they were just right. The projectile can be found in its own blueprint using a projectile movement component in order to make it move, while this mechanic is used to spawn it. As the left mouse button is clicked, the projectile will spawn in front of the player and fly forward, unless the player doesn't have any ammo, in which the player can no longer fire a projectile, bringing back the idea of ammo pickups, making the game more difficult and more suspenseful. Moving on to the enemy blueprint, the patrol mechanic is a simple move to target mechanic with 2-second delays in between, to allow the player that time to make a move and progress through the level. The 3 target points are placed in sections around the map and were carefully planned out ahead of time in a photoshopped level layout, which I will talk more about in the level design section. The same projectile mechanic from the player blueprint was placed here with an idea for gunplay to be involved within the level. Similar to the health system in the player blueprint, it was scrapped for a more simple chase player mechanic to save on time, and was also planned to be tested and possibly implemented at a later date. The chase mechanic, however, works fine in its place, creating more panic in the player when the enemy turns and runs at you, rather than a turn and shoot. A health mechanic was also planned to be involved, but was replaced with a one-shot death mechanic instead. This ultimately should have been implemented, as it would have improved the overall gameplay and made it more difficult for the player to navigate through the level. This in turn would have made the player really think about the route they would take throughout each section of the level. The other blueprints include a falling, caught, and ending mechanic, in which each distinct menu will appear and will ask the player whether they wish to retry or quit the game, which you saw within the gameplay section. Each blueprint also has its own UI, with specific text depending on the outcome. The ammo pickup blueprint is also featured, with a simple box collider, custom event, and destroy actor. Finally, the level design section. Starting off with the first section, like stated before, a photoshopped layout was created using the white box template I made at the very start. Objects such as the washing lines and roof access doors were inspired by the level in Mafia 1 Definitive Edition, and these doors were to be used as enemy spawn points. With these objects in place, enemy patrol routes were placed and planned out. However, they were eventually changed to remain on individual roofs as the enemies were unable to walk across. The next section of roofs were a subtle idea to change how top-down games were usually played. Top-down games usually stick with the enemy and player being on the same level, which is why I decided to add inclines similar to factory roofs to add a new element to the gameplay. This was also done to not allow the game to become repetitive like I stated in my design document. The second to last section was based primarily off the first section, with the gameplay change being focused on the amount of enemies. 6 enemies and a max ammo of 6 bullets creates more thought-provoking and suspenseful gameplay. The final section is a forced stealth section, in which the max ammo is placed next to enemy patrol, making the player choose to sneak to the end or grab the max ammo, in which you saw these two choices play out in the gameplay section. Cars are placed in parking positions around the map to make the level seem more alive. An idea to have some cars move was planned to be implemented, however time constraints ended up scrapping the concept. Some of the cars are primarily these SUVs, suggesting to the player that these are the cars the enemies used to get to that location, a simple narrative element that I think works. The original death, falling and cart menu would have originally looked like this, but was eventually changed to the same mechanic as the minimap seen on screen, with a camera placed within the level and a material being created from what the camera sees. Overall, I believe my game is of the best of my ability, considering the amount of time I gave myself. Time constraints on my part have always been an issue for me, and the games I've made. Obvious improvements that I've talked about throughout this video are a testament to that. However, I do plan on coming back to this game eventually and improving the mechanics accordingly.